Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Denver saxophonist Keith Oxman. He talked about his 2020 CD, Two Cigarettes in the Dark. The very seasoned veteran Houston person joined Keith and his quartet for his latest outing, and it is a great pairing. We caught up with him at the beginning of the COVID-19 quarantine lockdown in March 2020. He opened up about all of this. Enjoy.
So I have really enjoyed Two Cigarettes in the Dark, and of course, when I listened to this CD, it was under a whole different guise of what our world is now. So I think it's probably good to conduct these interviews to kind of have a minute away from the reality of what's going on around the world.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So how's everything going in Denver?
Well, it's tough, man. It's like anywhere. I mean, but I guess if you think about it in perspective, there have been a lot of other things and a lot of people going through worse than this. But it's weird. I mean, for the most part, I've just stayed in the house the entire time, except for yesterday. I did meet with one person because we're mixing another record that I did that hopefully will be out next year.
Very cool. Well, I guess I should start off with thanking you for taking a minute to talk with Neon Jazz today about the new album, and that's
thank you, man. I love these interviews you do with me, and
cool.
I've really enjoyed them.
Right on. Yeah, it's been a huge pleasure of mine. And again, it was wonderful to see another album come out, and I know that you're pretty prolific in putting albums out. You've got some great cats to contribute. I know you got a vocalist on this album, but it just really matches up with that feeling that you have with your music. So talk to me a little bit about how this album came around, how it's Two Cigarettes in the Dark, and kind of that thing.
Well, okay. The album, Jeff Jenkins, piano player on the record, told me that he was playing, I guess they play every year, the trio that's on that record, they play once a year with Houston Person, who comes to Denver to play. And, I had met Houston one time very briefly because I went to hear him play. I just love his playing, and I had records of his since I was in high school. And so anyway, Jeff told me, Houston's going to be in town, and he said, I just mentioned it to him about the possibility of doing a two-tenor recording, and he was more than into it if you are. And so I said, I was, of course. And then I wasn't sure. I don't remember exactly what happened. We were having a hard time getting the studio that I wanted. And then Houston called me and said, look, man, if we're going to do it, we got to do it now. And so he says, something like, you could get us a cave. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be that studio. But anyway, that studio finally did open up, and I got it, and I got the engineer that I wanted. And then we just went in, and he had supplied a couple of tunes he wanted to do. There was one of his that I really wanted to do, but he didn't, for whatever reason, he didn't do it. I think he'd already recorded it, and he was under contract with a record company, and he couldn't re-record that. I didn't get any of it, but I understand it, but I don't understand enough about the business end of it to understand what he was up against. I know he had some sort of contract, but anyway, we did the record, and Two Cigarettes in the Dark was just a tune that I had been working on. It's an old standard that Bing Crosby sang. And I really liked the tune, and I could not find any jazz recordings of that tune. They were all ballads done by people like Bing Crosby, these crooners. And I thought it would be kind of nice to do it kind of as a medium. And so we did it, and it just seemed like a good title for the record. So that was it.
Right on. Years ago when I started getting into jazz, I used to listen to late night radio in Kansas City, and there was one call-in show, and I used to win tickets all the time, and I lived right downtown, right next to the Folly Theater, and I remember seeing Houston, and it was a wonderful show, and I remember at that time Tom Harrell and a bunch of people, I must have been the only guy calling into the show, but I won tickets all the time, and it was wonderful. So I used to go to this. Yeah, I mean, it's still a very historic place in Kansas City. It's got great acoustics. But anyways, I remember Houston being there. I remember seeing him live, and he's got so many miles on his odometer in the jazz world in various incarnations. So I'm sure.
He's such a sweet person too. I'd only met him. Well, like I said, I met him one time because I went to hear him play, and somebody had introduced me to him. In fact, I think it was Jeff. He had introduced us, and the only other time, I guess I saw him another time after that, but we did that thing in the studio. We'd never really played together, and he just was so nice, and he just made that session so great. And he's called, several times after that just to check in and see how things are going, and he's just a really beautiful person.
You've been fortunate to be around real powerhouses. I believe it was Dave Holland was on your last album, correct?
No, Dave Liebman.
Dave Liebman, I'm sorry. Yeah, my bad. But I do know that you've been around some powerhouses. What is it like to be around that, and when they pick up their instrument and start going, what's it feel like to be around that?
Well, I just played with Dave in France. We played a festival with an Italian rhythm section. Gosh, I mean, to me, just being able to pick up an instrument, even in my own home, is just feels like a real gift. But then to be around people like that have lived so much of the history, it feels. I mean, it's surreal, and it's like as close as I will get to that history, being so much younger. Like with Dave, the connection with Miles and Elvin Jones, and then with Curtis Fuller, the connection with Coltrane. These are people that have always been of great interest to me, but I will never get any closer than playing with the people that played with them. So I absolutely cherish it. It's great.
A little bit before when we interviewed, I had interviewed Dave probably 6 months prior to that, and I just couldn't believe how happy he was to talk with me, and he was truly appreciative of what radio's doing and what I've been doing with interviews, and I'm still blown away by how nice and how complimentary he was. But I think about him, I think about Houston, I think about these cats, these older cats that have been around Miles and have been around the history. Do you get a sense from them that they're really trying to protect this kind of Olympic torch of jazz and make sure that it really continues to burn as brightly as possible to carry on the lineage?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think it's the other person I forgot to mention was Charles McPherson, who was just not only just a wonderful person but an unbelievable musician. Yeah, I do think that they are very committed to that, and in Dave's case, he's committed to it educationally as well. I mean, he's got that organization that brings together people from all these different countries. They don't even necessarily speak the same language, and they get together in various places throughout the world. And I can't remember the initials of it offhand, but this great organization, I've had friends that have been involved in that, and what a contribution. And he must have this burning desire to see this continue, because he's sunk so much energy into the educational aspect of it.
So let's say you come to Kansas City with this album. When the dust settles and we get beyond what we're living right now with the virus, and you get to present this to a crowd in Kansas City, what will a show from Keith Oxman in Kansas City be like? What will the fans and the crowd get from what you bring here?
The crowd, boy, you're assuming a lot there. What would they get from me as far as like a performance?
Yeah, what memories, what kind of overall feeling are you wanting to give the crowd with a performance by you?
Well, I would hope that they would find some enjoyment in something that we were doing. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I've not been really, I'm trying to come up with the words. I've not been this really scheming sort of musician, like where I go to play and I try to. I'm not a trickster in any way or anything like that, and I haven't probably been the best at selling. Nor do I feel like I necessarily have anything to sell. I mean, I'm trying to do this art, this art form justice to the best of my ability. And so I'm hoping, I think selfishly, I'm hoping first that, whenever I go to play, I'm hoping that I reach some sort of artistic level. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you go in and it's just not an inspiring sort of thing. No fault of anybody's. It just, for whatever reason, doesn't click. Who knows whether it's within the musicians, within the band or whatever it is. But I would hope that the people would come away and think, that there was music that was honestly portrayed and that I wasn't trying to be dishonest in any sort of way and presented it in a very straightforward fashion, and we found something of enjoyment in that presentation.
So on another hand, let's say those that buy your CD, download, get your latest CD, Two Cigarettes in the Dark. What do you want the fan, the listener, to get from this experience of this album?
Well, kind of the same thing, that this was music that was fun making. I mean, I can't tell you, but being in the studio with Houston was just one of the most joyous experiences. He was so delightful, and we took our time. I mean, we did it all in a day, but we took our time. I mean, I think we were there 8 hours or more. Whereas, like with Liebman, which was also fun, but it was much more to the point in that we got it done, I think, in 4 hours. With Houston, we sat around and we exchanged stories. It was like hanging out. It was great, and I would hope the listener would maybe hear that, that spirit that was in the studio that day when they hear the record. And I hear it, but I'm so close to it, I just remember what it was like.
I guess on a final note here, there's a lot of musicians and a lot of fans probably too that are wondering, kind of what's going to change, how are we going to reassemble, and what it's going to be like. What do you think it's going to be like probably to not only perform live, but to experience live music once we have the chance to get out of this, pandemic hiatus and we get to be back in the real world? What do you think that's going to be like? Or what do you hope that the listener or the musician gets out of this that enhances who they are as people?
Well, I think that once people get, I don't know, I mean, I just a gut feeling, once people get past this fear that's going on and we get past what is actually going on and people feel like it's safe to be out, I can't imagine that the crowds aren't going to be larger. I would think that they would be. If people feel it's really safe to do that, we've been inside, it's a week and a half already. Most people have just been holed up inside, and I'm sure people are going to be chomping at the bit to get out, and I'm sure musicians are going to be thrilled to be playing. I would think the initial performances would be really special and really charged with a lot of energy and creativity and all of that, because we haven't been doing this. Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, that's it. No. Yeah, you totally hit it. I just took a minute to kind of absorb what you were saying. But yeah, so Keith, thank you for taking some time out today and under very special circumstances in the world we're in to talk about your album and Houston and all things related to that. I appreciate your time and good luck with everything. Stay safe.
Thank you, Joe. Same to you, man. Great talking to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Denver, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Keith for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, support the arts and enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.